Chapter 4, Thoughts versus Thinking. Stop thinking and end your problems. Thoughts are energetic, mental raw materials from which we use to create everything in the world. We can't experience anything without thought. It's important to know that thoughts are a noun and aren't something that we do, but something that we have. A thought takes no effort or force on our end, and it is something that just happens. We also cannot control what thought pops into our mind. The source of thoughts comes from something that is beyond our minds, the universe, if you will. Thinking, on the other hand, is the act of thinking about your thoughts. This takes a significant amount of energy, effort, and willpower, which is a finite resource. Thinking is actively engaging with the thoughts in your mind. You don't have to engage with each thought in your mind, but when you do, that is thinking. Thinking is the root cause of all of our psychological suffering. Now you might be wondering, where do positive thoughts fit into the picture? Positive thoughts, or thoughts that feel good, are not the result of thinking. They are instead generated by our natural state of peace, love, and joy. They are a byproduct of a state of being, not a state of thinking. We will go into depth about this in the next chapter. For now, let's do a quick thought experiment. I'll ask you a question, and all you need to do is be aware of what you're experiencing, and we'll review what happened later. What is the dream amount of money you want to be making a year? Pause here and wait for the answer to surface. Give yourself about 30 to 60 seconds to think about your answer of how much money you want to be making a year. Don't move on to the next step until you have a decently sized train of thought about how much you want to make. Now take that amount and multiply it by 5. What do you think about this new dream goal for your income when we multiplied it by 5? Take at least another 30, 60 seconds to become aware of how you're feeling when you think about that and see what other thinking comes up in you as you feel your emotions. Don't move on until you've done the above. Okay, let's bring it back and review what happened. After I asked the first question of what is the dream amount of money you want to be making per year, within a few seconds an answer popped into your mind. That is a thought. Notice how quickly and effortlessly that came to you. After the answer popped into your mind, I asked you to think about your answer. What happened once I asked you to think about your answer? If you're like most people, you probably went on a wild roller coaster once you began thinking about the thought. You might have been thinking how there's no way you can make that much. No one in your family is making that much money. You don't know how to make that much money. It's stupid to want that much money, or that it makes you greedy. Notice how you felt when you were thinking about those thoughts. Most likely it didn't feel that great, but that is okay, and I'll show you what you can do about it soon. This is the prime example of thoughts versus thinking. If I ask you a question, you will 100% have a thought that pops into your mind. Thoughts are not inherently bad. Remember that they are the energetic, mental, raw materials from which we create the world. The moment we think about our thoughts is when we begin to get taken on an emotional roller coaster. When we think about our thoughts, we begin to judge and criticize the thoughts and experience all sorts of internal emotional turmoil. When I asked you how much you want to make, you had the thought about the amount. That thought was neutral and didn't cause any emotional toil. In fact, you might have felt expansive and excited. It was only when you began to think about the thought of how much you wanted to make, which is what caused the self-doubt, unworthiness, anxiety, anger, guilt, or any other emotion you may have experienced. That is what I mean by thinking is the root of all of our suffering. Having the initial thought of how much you wanted to make didn't cause any suffering until you began thinking about the thought of how much you wanted to make. It is not necessary to think about our thoughts or to judge them. It does us no good to do so. We may think that thinking is helping us, but all it's really doing is causing us to feel all of these negative, unwanted emotions and making us create reasons as to why we can't do or why we shouldn't want it. The only thing that was useful and helpful was the initial thought that popped into your mind when I first asked how much you wanted to make. All of the thinking that happened after was destructive and unhelpful. Thoughts create, thinking destroys. The reason thinking destroys is because as soon as we begin to think about the thoughts, we cast our own limiting beliefs, judgments, criticisms, programming, and conditioning onto the thought. thinking of infinite reasons as to why we can't do it and why we can't have it. Without thinking, we prevent all negative programming and judgments from tarnishing the initial thought of what you want to create. If I asked you, what are some ways you could make the amount of money you want? If you sat there long enough, you'll experience the same phenomenon of having random thoughts pop into your head of ways you could make it happen. These are thoughts of creation. Thoughts are inherently infinite, expansive, and energetically positive. You'll know you are having a thought from the divine when you feel positive emotions, feel lighter and alive. As soon as you begin thinking about those thoughts of the ways you can make the money you want, you'll immediately feel heavy, restricted, limited, along with the whole onslaught of negative emotions. This is how you'll know if you're thinking. I use my feelings as an internal radar that tells me whether I'm getting direct downloads of thoughts from the universe or if I'm in my head thinking about my thoughts. You can only ever feel what you're thinking, so feelings and emotions are like an intuitive internal dashboard, which tells me if I'm thinking too much or not. If I'm having a lot of negative emotions, I know that I'm thinking too much. This is another example of how we are naturally built for success. I love that this book provides us the terminology to distinguish between constructive thoughts and destructive thinking. You remember when we was kids and we got sent to do a chore that we really didn't want to do, but we knew that there was another chore behind that we didn't want to do as much or more? So we would take our time doing the one chore and try to drag that out under the childish auspice that the following task would just disappear or vanish into thin air if we took long enough, or maybe somebody else would do it. Listen, you're not on a physical journey which you get to extend with good choices or shorten with ill-advised, illogical decisions. But you've been so in tune with your physical container, so in tune with your physical expression, that you've postponed the development of your spiritual entity, your higher self, the I amness inside of you that you lack the awareness of, that one has grown mighty and giant, though being an illusionary monster, and the other has grown weak and dormant as it remains sound asleep. Some people say life is a game. I disagree, because in games there are winners and there are losers, and there's also an end. In life, aligned with spiritual truth, an ending is just a new beginning, and to lose must be an illusion because loss doesn't even exist. If you could stop thinking about your thoughts could flow into the reality that you've been desiring all of your life, chasing endlessly, never being able to obtain by your own efforts and plans. It's your thoughts about your thoughts that keep you from being confident when you step to somebody to go and present your original idea. Now you're stumbling all over your words. You can't communicate clearly what you saw inside of yourself when you're the only one that saw it, because you've listened to the chatter of the legion of voices so long that the picture is now in pieces, shattered amongst the mob of unruly savages. You should learn to see the illusions that you entertain to be just as childish as the nature that you operated from when you created them. Small kids only know how to do one thing, and that's tend to themselves, care for themselves and their own selfish desires. They don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they hungry. They don't care if you just changed the diaper and diapers cost $20 a pack. It doesn't matter. When I have a desire, I have something that I want, I cry, crab, and complain until I get it. I put no effort into it on my own, but I demand it from others. You gonna let these little minions on the inside of you that you created in the darkness tell you how you should act, tell you what you should be thinking, tell you what other people should have did, tell you how other people should conduct themselves in your absence. It's insane. But we live backwards many times because we don't know the authentic or original design of the way things were constructed to be. So we have the brain often driving and controlling the entity that we know as ourself. We have the slave master being beaten and whooping by the slave. And we also have the picture of the parent being parented by the child. We have our childish desires and our childish dislikes leading the way through life, dictating to us and causing us to dictate to other people the right way. And if anybody ever walked up to you and told you that a sleeping man sat in the dark and wrote a book, you would think that there was very little value in that. But when you sit in the dark with no knowledge of other people, no knowledge of yourself, no knowledge of your creator, no factual knowledge at least, only your assumptions and what you would like to be true, your superstitions, what you were taught by your parents or your ancestors, and you formulate a law, a code for yourself and for others to follow, that is exactly the amount of value in that book as well. It's just as if a blind man sat in the dark and wrote a code of ethics for life. And he was an infant who knew nothing and had experienced nothing of truth yet. All of the thinking you've ever done in your head about your thoughts was all about your survival. You've been receiving divine ideas since the beginning of time. And since you've incorporated fear inside of your picture, you've been considering what that thought could mean for you by thinking it through. And we were taught that if you don't think something through, you're not responsible. You're not doing the appropriate thing with the thought. You got to think it through. You got to think about all the things that could go wrong. And that's where education failed us. That's where school dropped the ball. Because in teaching me how to be a suitable civilian, you guided me away from moving in alignment with my authentic design. Can you just lock in and begin to enjoy your thoughts and stop thinking so much about your thoughts that you live in a perpetual state that seems a lot like hell?